Those little yellow caps. They're so cute. Anyway, huh? Like, you eat that? That sounds gross. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Today we're going to talk about something that is very close to many people's hearts, and that is food. But not just any food. We're going to talk about school food. And as you might know, I'm from the UK, so I'm going to be sharing a few little things, a few British dishes that you might find in British schools, and compare them with some of the Japanese dishes that I tried when I was working in Japan. Ready? So let's jump into it. Now let's start with British school lunches, something that you might not know much about. When I think back 20 years ago in primary school, oh, by the way, primary school is another name for elementary school here in the UK. In America and Japan, you say elementary, junior high, high school, and then university. But here in the UK, we say primary, secondary, college, and then university. Now, if I had to describe British food in one phrase, I would say it's very hit or miss, meaning sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not so great. Of course, the quality of the food depends on the area, whether it's a rich area or a not so rich area. If you're going to a rich school, they're going to have all these professional chefs, fine dining with steak and wine. I mean, maybe not in primary school, but you know what I mean. But I'm going to talk about the standard British school lunch. When you enter a school, you usually have two options. The first one is catering. In other words, the school cooks hot meals there, and you go to a dining room. Of course, it depends on the school as well, but you go to a place, maybe the classroom or maybe a dining room, to eat your lunch. Now, I'm sure many of you want to know, what do British school children eat for lunch? And that's a very good question. Let me show you. Of course, because it's the UK, one of the most popular options, especially on a Friday, is fish and chips, one of our national dishes. When it comes to vegetables, carrots and peas are usually one of the most common choices. But can you guess the vegetable that we eat the most? Well, the answer is potatoes. If we compare the amount of potatoes used in school lunches to other vegetables like peas or carrots, potatoes win by a landslide. I guess it's because potatoes are so versatile. You can cook them and prepare them in so many different ways. You know, things like roast potatoes, mashed potatoes, boiled potatoes. There are those traditional ways of cooking them, but as for children, one very popular option is potato smileys. I'm sure you know, children love looking at and playing with their food, and they're more likely to eat it if it looks visually attractive. Of course, sometimes you see children playing with their food, like cutting out the eye of the potato smiley, or removing the mouth, or cutting the face in half. Like, as a teacher, when you see these children doing that, it's a bit worrying. And another common favourite in British school lunches is square pizza. Now, don't ask me why it's square and not a traditional round pizza. If I had to guess, I guess square is easier to cut and kind of measure the size, because of course, you know, you want to make all of the slices of pizza the same size, right? Otherwise children will start complaining and say, oh, his piece is bigger than mine. Anyway. But when I compared British school food to my experience in Japan, I noticed that we have, here in the UK, a lot less fish. Now, as you know, fish is absolutely amazing. It's healthy, it's got those omega-3 oils, it's a nice source of protein. And here in the UK, we do have fish in the form of cod, and sometimes in a kind of shepherd's pie. That's another traditional British dish, but definitely nowhere near the same level as Japan. And when it comes to dessert, there's a very interesting dish that when I tell my Japanese friends, they think, huh? Like, you eat that? That sounds gross. And that is rice pudding. So here's the thing. When we say pudding here in the UK, it's kind of like a general word for a sweet dessert. In Japan, it means kind of like a flan, like this kind of like jelly-like pudding that has a bit of like maybe caramel on the top. But in the UK, it's a lot more general. For example, in the UK, we have sticky toffee pudding, we have rice pudding, and we also have bread and butter pudding, and they're all completely different. Rice pudding is basically a mixture of rice, milk, maybe some cream, and in some cases, people like to add jam. I actually really like it. I think it's absolutely delicious, but I can understand why many foreigners think rice? Sweet dessert with milk and cream? That sounds gross. Like, I can totally understand that reaction. But anyway, let's move on to the second option. When you enter a school, you can have catering, school lunches, or you can also bring your own lunchbox. The funny thing about British lunchboxes is the design. Often you'll find designs of Disney characters or other famous cartoons on the outside of the lunchbox. When children are wearing the same uniform, the lunchbox was a nice way to kind of show off your individual charm and show what you are interested in. When I was a child, I remember having this like bright orange lunchbox. I think on the front there was a person called Action Man. Very original name, I know. He was kind of like a less cool James Bond, I think. And these lunchboxes, they were a big part of our identity as a young child, right? So sometimes in the middle of the year, a child might get a new lunchbox, for example, and they would always, want to show it off to all of their friends. It was a big event getting a new lunchbox, right? It's like updating your identity, showing your new self. But the even more interesting thing, at least in my opinion, was there was a kind of ecosystem when it comes to eating lunch. Well, let me explain. Every child, again, depending on your family, would have different things in their lunchbox, yeah? The standard items would be a piece of fruit, a sandwich of some sort, and maybe a snack like a bag of crisps or something like that. Now, of course, depending on your family and what kind of things your family eats or buys, everybody would have something slightly different. And although it was against the rules, like you were not supposed to do this, everybody, like almost everybody, would try to trade some of their food with, the people sitting next to them, or even if they were desperate, people on other tables. Let's say, for example, you are absolutely starving. You've been looking forward to lunch for hours, and you open your lunchbox and you find that disgusting yellow banana. You hate bananas. It's gross. But then you look at the person or the child next to you and you see they have a nice, perfect, shiny red apple. You think, I really wish I had that apple right now. So in this situation, most children would try to trade. They would try to find something in their lunchbox that the other person wants, and they would trade. If you're lucky, maybe you could trade that banana for the apple. Maybe they prefer bananas. But it's often not that easy. Sometimes you have to sacrifice more food just to get that one item, and some children were not very good at making deals, and sometimes they wouldn't even trade food. Sometimes they traded favors. In other words, they would ask other people to do something for them in exchange for food. For example, if the person says, I'll give you my apple, but only if, when we play tag, by the way, tag is the English name for onigokko. So after they finish eating lunch, they usually go outside and play tag. They might say, you have to be it. That means they have to chase the other people because usually children like to run away instead of chasing after others. So sometimes these children would be very cunning and they would try to exchange favors because they know the other person really wants what they have. But for me, I had a very special advantage, and that was I was the only Asian child in my class, in my year, I think. Maybe even in the school. So the things or the food items, the snacks, the drinks that I brought in my lunchbox were usually quite unique and different. You know, my mother's from Hong Kong, so sometimes I had some like Hong Kong snacks or Hong Kong dishes. People would look into my lunchbox and they would be like, oh, what is that? I've never seen it before. So I had a special advantage. You know, people want to try my exotic goods. I wasn't very smart, but I had some power. So yeah, as you can see, there was a lot of business and, you know, shady deals happening between these 6, 7, 8-year-olds in primary school. Now let's move on to the other side of the world, Japan. Some of you might know this, but I used to work as an ALT for about 7 or 8 months in Hiroshima. I worked in a junior high school and an elementary school, and I absolutely loved it. And one of my favorite things was experiencing, you know, school culture and the school lunches in Japan. Before I went to Japan, I had seen online videos and I'd heard stories that Japanese food was very good. But even when I went there and tasted it for the first time, it just blew my expectations out of the water. Like, I was absolutely mind blown by how amazing it was. Now, for Japanese people who eat these school lunches, you know, every day during your childhood, it probably gets a bit boring and you want to try something different, right? You know, the grass is always greener, that kind of thing. But I have to say, do not take Japanese school lunches for granted, because not only me, but my foreign friends, foreign ALTs from other countries, you know, outside of the UK, Europe, America, Canada, they all agreed that Japanese school lunches are way better. You have two things. You have a wide variety of, you know, delicious dishes, and you also have the nutritional value that comes from this variety. Protein, sugars, fats, carbohydrates, you know, it's the best of both worlds. And another thing I love about Japanese school lunches is, well, not the food itself, but seeing all of the children do the, I think you call it toban, where it's everybody has a different kind of job, right? There are children who serve the food, there are people who clean up the dishes and put them on this like trolley. It's absolutely amazing. And another thing, seeing those children with those like white aprons, the white mask, the little hair nets, like they kind of look like these small surgeons in a hospital, these 8-year-old surgeons getting ready to perform surgery. I think they're absolutely adorable, and so many people agree with me. This is not just me. I don't even like children that much. Okay, that's a bit far, but I'm not obsessed with children. I don't love children, but when I see them wearing those like uniforms, especially those little yellow caps, they're just, they're so cute. Anyway, I'm getting completely sidetracked. Going back to the food itself, another interesting cultural difference that I've noticed is the arrangement of food. That is, when you have food in Japan, not just in school lunches, but in general, like if you go to a washoku, a Japanese restaurant, you will see that there is one small main dish and lots of like small side dishes, right? On one tray, you can have like 4 to 5 different bowls and plates, right? But in the UK and many other European countries, it's mostly just one plate. Like vegetables, salad, meat, just everything on one plate. Now, there are some small exceptions. For example, of course, soup, you need to put it in a bowl, and maybe salad because you're adding the dressing. But generally, most of the food is on one big plate. So it made me think, why does Japan separate all of these foods into different dishes? Like, it means more washing up later, right? Is there any advantage to separating these dishes? And another cultural difference I noticed is when eating curry. When I went to Japan and, had curry at a friend's house, I would have the rice in one bowl and I would put the curry directly on top. Right, and I would just eat it together. But I've noticed that Japanese people, maybe not all Japanese people, but they separate the curry in one bowl and the rice in the other. And I think from what I've heard, the reason is so that you can control the ratio or the amount of curry to rice, right? Which makes a lot of sense, like I totally get that. But I don't know about school lunches and more general situations. Now, this isn't the reason, but there's a very interesting effect in psychology, which is called the Delboeuf illusion. Let me show you a picture. Here are two pictures of the same pizza, but we have different sizes of plates. To put it in a nutshell, the Delboeuf illusion shows that when some food is placed on a plate that is much larger, it looks smaller compared to the same size or the same amount of food on a smaller plate. And the interesting thing is that they've also found color, shape, and size of the plate, or sometimes cup, can affect our sense of taste and how full we feel. For example, if you're on a diet and you don't want to take in so much sugar, a good idea is to use a red cup. Red is a kind of signal for something sweet, strawberries, apples. In nature, red is a big sign of sugar and sweetness. So if you want to have a bitter coffee and you have a red cup, it might taste sweeter. Well, that's what they say. So maybe that's why we as Europeans or British people like to have one big plate, because when we put everything onto one plate and there's no space left, it looks like a lot of food, when maybe it's not, but that's one idea. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson and maybe you learned something about psychology, maybe food psychology, British culture, and how foreigners see Japanese culture, and specifically your school lunches. Don't forget, next there will be the vocabulary view, so please have a look at that. Thank you very much, have a wonderful day, and bye for now. Today we're going to talk about something that is very close to many people's hearts, and that is food. Now, if I had to describe British food in one phrase, I would say it's very hit or miss. If we compare the amount of potatoes used in school lunches to other vegetables like peas or carrots, potatoes win by a landslide. Sometimes these children would be very cunning, and they would try to exchange favors because they know the other person really wants what they have. You want to try something different, right? The grass is always greener, that kind of thing. Those little yellow caps, they're so cute. Anyway, I'm getting completely sidetracked. The reason is so that you can control the ratio or the amount of curry to rice, right? Which makes a lot of sense, I totally get that. But